In the studio this morning is Nduoko Eric Latif, and our guest host is Ruben Kigame, musician and political activist. Our colleague C.T. Muga is unwell today. We wish him quick recovery.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he'll be with us tomorrow. Let's bring in our guest now for the hour. And this is the Commissioner with the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, Sam Kona. He's on the line. A lot has been happening around the NCIC in the recent past. Now, today, there's a whole talk of this amendment to the NCIC Act of 2008, which the National Assembly Security Committee wants to introduce a new clause that deals with criminalizing what they're saying is a person who utters words intended to incite feelings of contempt, hatred, hostility, violence, or discrimination against any person, group, or community on the basis of the social status of a person commits an offense. So this is basically now bringing in class divisions, social status divisions, and saying that as well, let's criminalize it. We already know there's hate speech and how hate speech has been criminalized in the Act. But how effective has the Act been so far on what has already been prescribed in the law as hate speech? Commissioner Sam Kona, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you.
We've talked about this before, and this is with regards to NCIC and the wide mandate that you have, but focusing mainly on what we call political crimes here, if we are just so to call them. Hate speech, for example. Many times we've seen NCIC, raise concern about statements that have been uttered by political leaders in certain fora. And in some cases, you've even gone ahead and seen MPs or politicians arrested, taken to court. But it sort of now fizzles out there. Is it the effect of the law itself that you're not even able to prove that what this person said, first of all, was inciting? Or what is the reason?
Yeah, thank you, Latif. I think I need to put everything into context.
Yes.
When we had this conversation last year, the situation was not as dire as it is today, because what we are witnessing at the moment has even descended to the level of personalized attacks or personalized insults among political leaders. And there is generally a breakdown in terms of what we regard as common decency and respect for individuals and also for offices. And in the process, the leadership itself has lowered the demands or the requirements of leaders to uphold certain ways of behavior and also to respect the institutions that we have. NCIC has been in existence for the last over 10 years. And what I will say is, for us, most of our work is not really related to hate speech as such. That is what the institution is more associated with. But we do a lot of peace work, a lot of community cohesion, a lot of dialogue, and other activities that promote patriotism and respect for national values and governance instruments. Hate speech has been a big problem, but I would say the problem is not more on the application of the NCIC Act that disallows hate speech or dangerous speech or incitement. More of the problem we have as a country relates with our own norms and our value systems. Because from what I've already said, there is a certain behavior expected of leadership, which under normal circumstances will not be legislated. But you find a leader of national caliber making derogatory or disparaging remarks against people living with disability, for example.
Yep.
That kind of utterance is not expected, or politicians or leaders fighting in public. There is no limit to how much we can legislate these things. So ultimately, we also need to tackle or attack our own national value systems, and also for leaders to uphold the principles of leadership as enshrined in our Constitution and also in our normal human behavior.
You said just now, though, Sam, that we're in a dire situation. From where you sit, when you talk about the possibility of things going from a peaceful situation to a delicate situation now when it invites violence and things like that, that we could be very close to that with a lot of the political situations that we are seeing. There's a possibility that things could get worse. You called it just now a dire situation. So how then can things be leveled out with what we are seeing currently, from one political meeting to the next, with supporters shouting out certain things, giving a true picture of how they actually feel? So then where does the NCIC come in here to make sure that these situations are leveled?
Yeah, I call it dire because if you read the history of countries that have gone to the dogs or have been destroyed, it just starts with behavior like we are witnessing today in our country, where the leadership fails to uphold its own responsibilities and duties at all levels, whether it's at the party level, national level. But also linked to that is when you have institutions of law and order or governance that are partisan, that do not discharge their duties in a way that is impartial and a way that is predictable. So if you look at the number of months that are left before the next election, then you'll just wonder how we are going to go through it as a country, considering the level of political intolerance and personalized attack and insult the leaders have engaged in, and the fact that they have also started now using organized goons or what they call their supporters to disrupt other people's rallies, to heckle them. And the problem with this kind of behavior is that all the political leaders we have in Kenya have their supporters and have bases which they regard as their strongholds. So if one group of youth or goons disrupts a political leader in one part of the country, then the same behavior will be repeated should the opposite leader come to the other side of the country. So it will have a spiral effect whereby one negative act leads to more negative acts, and the third bit will be ultimately Kenyans will either be injured or they will lose their lives, and then we'll just be going to an election that is in itself difficult by its very nature, being a transitional election, being an election where there's succession politics, where we are getting into an election where the political or the ruling coalition is deeply divided, the opposition is weak, the electoral body has not been fully established. So if you look at all those factors and look at the ground in which all this is being played out, it's going to be a very difficult year going forward from now. But as an institution, what we have promised the people of Kenya is that we shall do all that we can to make sure that we have a stable country during and after the elections, and the elections will be violence-free. And to that end, the Commission already established a roadmap that will enable us to achieve what I've just said. And in addition, established an ad hoc committee, which I chair, to make sure that roadmap to a peaceful, stable country is pursued to the letter. And some of the main components in that roadmap relate to the issue at hand, the issue of political intolerance and personalized political disagreements. So we currently want to organize a symposium for political parties for them to initiate or to discuss some of the problems or the issues they think they need to address to avoid a situation whereby the political leaders are not talking to each other, and when they choose to talk to each other, they are not even articulating the policies and programs they will want to sell to the Kenyan people.
Yeah, okay, sir. So that sounds pretty, well stated. But I have a question for you. NCIC was actually established shortly after the 2007-2008 political violence that we experienced in this country. And we know that this sort of thing you are describing was actually the reason, in part, why NCIC was established. So I may ask, why now? Why 13 years later are we thinking about criminalizing this thing? And how might you be free from vilification where somebody could come and say, you are setting up this law now because you don't like somebody?
That's not the case. As you can imagine, we live in a social setting, in a political setting, where new issues emerge as we go the way.
What is new about this one? What is new about this that was not there in 2007, 2008, and the reason why you were established as a commission?
There is nothing new about it, because one of the issues that was identified during the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation process was the challenge of youth and the fact that we had an equal society. So there is nothing new in this particular issue. But when you see groups mobilizing or making it a policy where class differences or political differences are escalated to create conditions that can destabilize or create conditions of violence for the country, then as an institution, and as we deal with other arms of government like Parliament, it's our responsibility to regulate, to make sure that what we can see forthcoming is at least regulated by law. It's not targeting to any individual or any group of individuals. It's just a social problem that has come and we need to deal with it.
So why has it taken the commission this long to be able to push this particular angle? Why 13 years later?
As you can see, one of the problems that we have as a country is that all the issues that we recommended to be done during the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation process, we have not exhausted all of them. We've had a new constitution, but there are many other issues, especially what the Kofi Annan-led mediation process called as the long-term issues. So in terms of implementation of those issues, the problem of youth, for example, or inequality in our society is one that we've not been able to tackle head on the way we tackle the question of the Constitution, at least to a greater degree. And doing it 13 years later does not mean that we did not take it as a priority, but there are many other attempts that have been undertaken at the national level to make sure some of these issues are being sorted out. What is worrying for us now is to make sure that we tame the escalation in terms of class differences or political differences that may lead to violence or instability.
Yeah. To what extent would you say the wacky report has been implemented? Because I think it was a fairly good document to help us not go back to where we were.
It's not only the wacky report. As a matter of fact, if you refer to the wacky report, our electoral body should be fully functional by now, at least 2 years to elections as we had recommended. If you look to other reports, the TJRC report, the land report, there are many, many reports that if we were to take time as a country and implement them, some of these problems will be addressed at a structural level, as opposed to going to trying to regulate all manner of human behavior, when some of these issues are actually problems that could be addressed through economic interventions, others could be addressed through livelihood intervention, and so on and so forth. So we've had a weakness as a country in not following through some of the recommendations that we generate when we go through difficult times, as we did in 2007 and 2008.
Yeah, as a commission, would you say you have certain restrictions? What are some of the challenges you would attribute to maybe certain things not being done as yet? Are you resource limited, or do you face difficulty in, for example, bringing the TJRC report, the wacky report, all these wonderful reports to the forefront? Because I think if we did, we would probably not be where we are today.
Absolutely. If we implemented some of these, even half of them, the country will have made progress going forward.
What has prevented you as a commission?
The implementation of some of these things. Because if the implementation of some of these things have been stopped or have not been carried through, Sam, then some of these things that you're talking about now, even going forward for 2022, then it casts a shadow of doubt then in terms of what can actually be done to stop some of these things that we see would happen.
The issue, some of those reports are require top-level kind of intervention. And NCIC, for example, has been pushing for the implementation of some of the dimensions of the TJRC report. And ironically, some of those recommendations are also coming now through the BBI. And I'm sure if you had another intervention in future, they will come. So the problem has been not really institutions like NCIC or the judiciary or any other to do it. This one requires top-level political will to implement it. And since the report was handed over to the president, I think in 2013, it's not been possible to execute that process, because I think also it needs to go to parliament and be discussed and approved. There is a whole process.
Yep.
And that's why I'm saying what we need as an institution is to keep pushing and urging political leaders to put the country ahead, and also for the citizens to be mindful of how they can be used by these politicians in a way that can be destructive.
So there's a whole issue of political goodwill here in implementing these reports, in also ensuring that the NCIC functions fully. Because even if we look at the law, Commissioner, right now there's an act of parliament that gives you a lot of power and mandate on various issues. But if you look at those that touch directly on politicians, and that's why I was calling them the political crimes, those where politicians do things knowing that they are likely to incite, like you said, that they are likely to, bring tension in communities or around the whole country, those ones you really can't pin them down. You cannot go to court and prove that somebody has actually incited people by the words that they used somewhere. Right now, even with this new amendment and the way it's being framed, you really wouldn't be able to go to court and raise an issue about class division, that this person, with what they said, they have incited people, they have inflamed people, just using the words that have been written here, incited feelings of contempt, hatred, hostility, violence, or discrimination against anyone based on class. So is this of any use to have all these laws that are just written to make sure that you're just left pulling a rope here?
I think for us, we live on the principle of perpetual optimism, that whatever we do will ultimately yield some good results. We've been struggling with the hate speech law, for example, and we know where the problems are in terms of the threshold for evidence that the court established. The fact that the way the act was created or the law was generated requires that somebody has to complain, and that those people have to follow through. But in most cases, when the cases go to court, even the people who complained develop a cold feet. They don't come to provide the evidence for fear of intimidation or victimization thereafter, or because the cases drag too long, some of them just give up. So it's really a bigger problem that can be associated to only one institution. But as I said, we have to incrementally grow as an institution, as also as a country.
But actually, Commissioner, I see a problem with one institution, and the institution here is not NCIC. In my opinion, the institution is the House of Parliament, because they're the ones who make the law. And I dare say that they write this law knowing full well that they have left so many gaps where they shall get away from. They have written a law and ensured that there shall be a complainant, that the law and the threshold of evidence shall be this high. So a judge, even if you take this case before a judge, the judge is going to apply the law as has been written. The people who wrote the law knew very well that they were writing a law just for purposes of checking a box. This is where a problem is, and you have to keep relying on the National Assembly, for example, to pass the law. What other way can you go about to ensure that you actually have proper teeth that can bite, not milk teeth?
You know, as I said earlier, if the political will is not there at all levels, we will just be grappling in the dark as a nation. So, and also the process of lawmaking in Kenya is clearly stipulated, and you cannot overlook or overstep the role of parliament in all these processes. So what we hope, particularly in this particular new case, is the fact that now perhaps we have the political environment that will be conducive for people who the law may apply against to, first of all, put the country in front, and also to think about the future of the country. These laws are not made for people who are in office now. or who will occupy them. They're actually made in order to advance our country, to advance our democracy, to advance our cohesion. So we keep believing that one day we shall have the leadership in Parliament that will be able to, come up with laws without necessarily thinking about how these laws will apply to them, because that is what is the essence of leadership.
This morning, you have Nduoko Eric Latif and our guest host, Ruben Kigame. And online is a commissioner with the NCIC, Commissioner Sam Kona.
So, Commissioner Sam, as we're looking at some of these things, and you talked about, being able to act, and a lot of this shrouded in the lack of political will to bring some of these things to be. What happens in a situation today, right now, and as we are likely to see more and more of these political situations, somebody says something untoward, somebody riles up people, giving an example, what we saw at Makutano happen a few months ago. Somebody dies as a result of something that was said, or people are incited to violence or things like that because of political statements. Today, that happens. How exactly does the NCIC play a role in making sure that either one, folks are brought to book, or that it doesn't happen again? What is the process? What would happen in that situation?
Thank you very much. In our roadmap, we have thought about all those possibilities. As a matter of fact, what we are investing more is in prevention and early warning to make sure things do not happen. But as you've rightly observed, there's a possibility that things could actually get out of control. And what we are doing is we have a response mechanism that tackles different elements of the possible response, from humanitarian, and then with the security team, security interventions. But our main focus is to build the capacity of Kenyans to mediate, to dialogue. So currently we plan to have a capacity in every county of groups that are trusted, that are empowered, so that when things get out of control, they are able to bring the groups together in the form of dialogue or discussion. At the national level, where the trouble is, we are also talking with the top leaders of all political parties, and also what we regard as the elite mediators in Kenya, people who can be listened from across the board. Mm-hmm. We are currently organizing a team around that particular platform to make sure that even when things break down, we are able to access the top leadership of the country in terms of those who are leading political parties or those who are disagreeing in terms of their politics, so that we have a capacity as a country for response. What happened in 2008 and 7 was sad for Kenya, because we had to rely for international people to come and tell us to sit and talk. And 13 years later, as you already mentioned, we should be having that capability as a country. And that is one investment NCIC is putting in place to make sure we are also prepared for the worst case scenario.
So if I may ask, you have twice alluded to the fact that there is lack of goodwill at the top from the leadership of the country. Since we know that is exactly where the big problem is, how much as a commission have you engaged the top leadership to ensure that, somehow you address that whole issue of goodwill?
Our chairman and us, even as commissioners, we have a plan which we've been implementing since last year of meeting all the top leadership. For example, we have a discussion with the former Prime Minister, and we continue to meet leadership of all political parties. The symposium that we are planning to bring on board in March of this year is going to target the top political leaders of all the political parties in Kenya, particularly the main political parties, for us to sit with them and discuss the implications of what we are witnessing at the moment at the political scene, what it will mean for Kenya, and the role of political leaders in ensuring that, first of all, their political parties do take cognizance of the fact that the actions of the politicians does impact on the stability of the country. Secondly, we want to get from them their commitment from now going forward that they also have a responsibility to make sure the country does not descend into violence. And one of the things we hope to achieve once we engage them in the March symposium is for the political parties also to take responsibility on the actions of their own leaders. I am yet to see one political party that has suspended an individual for engaging in hate speech or incitement or behavior that is creating disharmony in society. Yet, when political leaders refuse to obey orders from their political parties or speak against the position of their political parties, we actually do see political action being taken by the top political leadership. We want the same kind of spirit and the same principle to apply for politicians who are inciting, those who are insulting, and those who are lowering the leadership bar in our country. For the political parties also to know that it is part of their responsibility to achieve that. So
Bwana Commissioner, we may not actually be looking at, the very top leadership, but let me address the issue of the police. For example, we see the police pick up people and stop them from doing certain things. Now, why do you think it is so hard for the police, for example, to stop two people from inciting each other at a podium? Let's say like what happened in Kisii. Do you need a president to be able to stop that?
If you recall what I said earlier, when institutions that are supposed to execute the rule of law and order do not act swiftly and impartially, you create conditions for impunity. You are absolutely right. And even as a commission, the thing we expected to happen in Kisii that day was the two members of parliament who were involved in that brawl should not have even continued with the proceedings of the burial afterwards. They should have been taken straight to police because that one was clearly an affront to the rule of law, the public decency, public gathering. I mean, they should have been behind bars immediately. But now, as you said, when institutions are reluctant, and that implies perhaps they are not perhaps independent in doing their job, or they do not execute their duties impartially. And those are the things that do destroy countries.
You talk about the symposium that you're planning to have with political parties and the leadership of the political parties in March, where you want to bring them together and you want them to make pledges. I think, if I recall, there was a similar move that was made around 2012, 2013, where the political players were brought together and they had to make these pledges. It was a joint effort between the commission and even civil society organizations saying, let's not see a repeat of 2007 or 5 years ago in this coming election, and where politicians were basically just coming to say, I commit to peace. But this is just one small bit of activity that takes place, and then it's not even binding. There is no law that binds them to make this peace. There's nothing that would happen to them if they don't even maintain the same peace. It's just a pledge. Are we likely to see the same thing happening coming out of March 2021, where political parties come and they stand alongside NCIC and they say, we commit and we pledge to uphold the peace, but then nothing that you can
happens.
do if they actually break that?
I actually disagree with you. I'm glad you mentioned the 2013 election where we had a similar process. And if you recall very well, 2013 elections were relatively peaceful. In fact, I'm proud to say that it was one of the speeches I've ever given outside this country to explain why the 2013 elections in Kenya was peaceful in Washington with the U.S. Institute of Peace in May of 2013. So the peace messaging that went and the pledges that groups signed in 2013 did contribute to a relatively peaceful election in 2013. And the critique later in 2017 was that there was too much peace messaging in 2013.
Yes.
But always, when you prevent something, especially in situations of conflict and violence, it is easier to be condemned if you fail in your prevention effort. When the prevention effort succeeds, it is very easy for people to say, you did not even need your action in order for that thing not to happen. So peace messaging, securing for commitment from groups, is a symbolic step in creating the conditions for peace. Two, there are groups that actually genuinely uphold what they pledge. And what we just need to do as a commission and other stakeholders have been mentioned, because we are not doing it alone, is to make sure we work together with the political leaders and the political parties every step of the way, in terms of even the messaging during the BBI referendum, during the campaign, during the actual elections, afterwards. It is going to be a continuous process. And we believe as NCIC that no leader in Kenya wants to destroy Kenya. All of us want a stable country. And that principle alone gives us the impetus to continue to talk to these groups and to create that consensus that we all need to do something for our country.
Commissioner Sam, do you believe, as a commission, as an individual, that if we see incitement of political leaders, of anybody, do you think that such individuals should be prosecuted?
I mean, incitement is a criminal act by any standard, whether even without applying the NCIC act. Incitement to violence, incitement to hatred are criminal things that can be dealt with in the penal code. One of the things we are exploring, and our chairman the other day mentioned it, is that we are talking with the DCI, ESCC, and Office of the Public Prosecutor and IEBC to find ways in which those individuals who are involved in hate speech or incitement or mobilization of groups into violence are actually barred from office, from contesting for electoral office. That's a process that's also in motion. And when you combine all these things that I've mentioned, from prevention to building a mediation capacity, to the regulation through laws, and of course, talking to the groups, the political leaders together, ultimately, if we do them well, they will create something that will be good for the country.
Maybe let me ask maybe an obvious about an obvious thing. When exactly does the campaign time start in Kenya? And I'm asking this because sometimes it gets difficult to distinguish between when somebody is acting in within their office jurisdiction and when they actually hit the campaign trail. Would you say that Kenya has been ushered into the campaign trail a bit too early?
I think being too early is generous. We've been in campaign mode since 2018. Immediately after the 2017 elections, the country has been in constant politicking and a constant campaign. And it is really bad manners in politics because we don't get the opportunity to give even those who have won the opportunity to govern. We do not provide them with the support they require from us as perhaps the opposition or the political leaders for them to govern. So, and if the political leaders do not realize the destructive nature of continuous politics and politicking, then maybe in the future we'll also find a law whereby we will bar them from politicking. But as
what can you do as NCIC? What are you able to do as NCIC to ensure that we don't start politicking and driving each other into polarization immediately an election has been concluded?
I actually don't think that is something that any institution has a role to play in. It is just for the political parties and the political leaders to be decent enough and say, fair enough, we've lost. Let's provide our constructive role as the opposition. Let's give these guys time to govern, and then we wait for the time. In fact, the process of campaigning is clearly stipulated in the Electoral Act. So, IEBC will one day declare when campaigns for the next elections will start and when they will end. Everybody knows that. But we've been hitting the campaign trail for the last 3 years, and we'll continue to do it. And ultimately, the country will be injured or will be completely exhausted by the time we come to the elections because of the fact that we've not been able to give a chance even for governance. And of course, development will be compromised in the process.
So let me ask you about two specific things. One is BBI. The other is what has come to be known as the hustler narrative. When you look at BBI in terms of citizen participation, we have come to a point where instead of looking at the issues in BBI and getting to the citizen participation stage, for them to even read the document and understand it. It's already been politicized, and now it's a matter of which county will vote it in and which one will not. So that's one. The other is that we have been treated to, of course, the freedom of speech and expression, but you find the polarization of a country into you belong to a dynasty, you belong to the hustler nation, so to speak. As NCIC, to what extent are you able to veto either the misuse of national processes like BBI or the misuse of the freedom of expression to polarize?
I wouldn't want to delve into commenting on political issues, but what I have to say is the BBI process, by its nature, by its origin, was political. It grew out of the 2017 political fallout, and it did stabilize the country for the years that it's been there, because before the handshake in March of 2018, all of us could not predict the next moment in Kenya what it will be. But the handshake did create conditions for stability, for harmony, and it has continued to do so. And now it has snowballed into a referendum or a constitutional amendment process, which still continues to be a political thing. There was a lot of public participation during the time they were collecting views from the people for almost 2 years. There was a national platform in November of 2019 to review it, and it's been a process that has been ongoing. So going to the counties now, the process of a referendum in itself is obviously divisive. You will have people who are opposing it and those who are against it. And because of its nature of being divisive, because of those who are against and for, then there will be platforms for people to campaign and to advance their position and to persuade the citizens to support their position. That's where now it appears to be political, and it's because of the methodology. When you are campaigning, it's like when you are doing the referendum and persuading people. So I would say it will continue to be a political process, and the county assemblies will go through it. I just pray that the county assemblies will not be intimidated, or they will not be persuaded in a negative way. They should just be allowed to exercise their own views about the document as far as they have read it. And then it goes to Parliament and then later the referendum.
What would you say the Commission is doing, for example, to prevent the kind of thing that happened in Bomet? Where in Baringo, where a document like BBI ends up, in a county assembly being tear gassed and so on, right at the discussion level. If that is not bad enough, I don't know what is in terms of the process. What is the Commission doing to ensure that we don't have repeat incidents like those?
Some of those incidents that you mentioned, like what happened in the Baringo County Assembly, as I said earlier, are things that can be dealt with using the common law or the penal code. If somebody misbehaved and required the police to intervene to restore law and order, so that is done at that point. What we discourage is where propaganda, intimidation, disinformation is used in a way that obscures even the objective components of the document, or where people use that for purposes of advancing their political agenda. Mm-hmm. As I said, it's a political process, but it will not be used to advance our political agendas. And as I said, let the county assemblies exercise their own freedom to determine, and whatever decision they take, they should be allowed to proceed with that decision because they are representatives of the people.
Maybe let me just ask you one more. How far as an individual or as a part of the Commission, do you think we are far as a nation from sitting together and really just talking about what divides us? We have issues, of course, that are in the documents we alluded to earlier, the TJRC report, the wacky report, and all that. But how far and perhaps how possible is it for us to really sit together and have a less politicized dialogue to be able to promote cohesion in this country?
For us to get national cohesion in Kenya, we need at least 2 or 3 generations. We need a campaign that is sustained. The ingredients are there for us to achieve that. If you talk to the citizens across this country, most of the citizens do not have problems with each other. If you look at the groups that we talk about as citizens of Kenya, they have similar problems. Whether you are in Nyeri or in Turkana or Baringo, the problems you face as a citizen are the same. And what you require of your country or leadership is to deal with them. Our biggest challenge as a country and the biggest impediment to national cohesion and patriotism in Kenya is our political culture, where mobilization has to be ethnic. Look at the recent case where the former Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Mukisa Kitui, announced his presidency. And then the next thing is he's going to divide the Luya. Yet he's seeking the position on behalf of all the people of Kenya. So unless we change our political mobilization strategy, our political basis, it will continue undermining our country. Look at all the political parties, for example, in Kenya. From the chairperson or the leader to the Secretary General to the Treasurer, look at them. Most of them, I'll say, have people from the same region. In some instances, most of them are from the same tribe. How do you move as a country when the entity for governance called political party is anchored on identity-based politics, either as a region or as a tribe?
But can you really run away from that, Commissioner? Can you really run away from, let's break it down. In a situation like where you have a school that is situated in a particular area and they say, you know what, post me to my area, post me to my region, or 60% or 70% of the teachers should come from this particular community. Is it too removed from how we are, how we think as a people, that a Mukisa Kitui presidency would then be viewed in the light of, hey, you're coming to interfere with an already, existing order. How far, can we run away from that? But also, as you answer that, maybe go back to the question I asked. We had a BBI process that was really politicized. How far are we? Is it possible for us to sit at another Bomas away from political activism, maybe directed by your commission? And let's talk about, you know what? This is what really ails us. This is how we view leadership. This is what is going wrong with our country. And this is how we can come together as one. Maybe just some quick comments on both.
On the BBI one, whether we can reverse the process, I think it is reversible now. That one has already left the station. Yeah. We just need to manage the process that will ultimately culminate in a referendum to make sure it is peaceful, no violence, no intimidation. On the other issue about how we are as a country, we might be the way we are, tribal, ethnic, but that's not how we should be. So the question should be, we need to move from where we are now to the next. If we don't, then the thing that will happen will ultimately destroy the country, because you cannot build a country of 42 plus tribes when you are driving it with perhaps only 5, for example, being the dominant ones that control it. There will come a time when the small ones will also say, what about us? Where are we in this equation? And that's why the paradigm shift has to take now, when we are in a peaceful state, perhaps, when we are in a state that we can be able to sit and dialogue on the question about the country that we desire as a nation.
Commissioner Sam, what is the position? Are we trying to get deterrence set to move people's minds away from insightful talk that would lead to chaos? Or are we trying to get people to behave in a manner that is acceptable throughout? So scare people or encourage them to behave in a certain way? What's the position of the commission, or what should be the position of the country?
If we tackled our value system, most of the problems we have relating to a relationship between groups and even politics will be changed. And it starts with small things. Look at people overlapping on the road. When you are just driving, you can see there's a vehicle that maybe has a problem. But instead of being patient, you now have that opportunity to break the law. It starts with small things like those. It starts with leaders upholding the leadership back. What has people living with a disability to do with what one Mheshimiwa Mbadi said about albinism, when the problem was supposed to be between him and Senator Mwaura? Why attack a whole group? As a matter of fact, all our laws disallow any form of discrimination. And people living with disability, for example, just like women, they have traveled far to be where they are today in our national discourse. We cannot afford to have leaders doing that kind of thing. That does not require legislation. And the leader who said that, or the leader who insulted the other's mother, or the leader who talked about the other's ex-wife, those are things that are not expected of any leader, leave alone political leader. So we need to get back to the basics of our values, to get back to the basics of basic decency, and also the fact that leaders are supposed to show example. What example are you showing when you can walk and punch your opponent in a public place? This is not expected. So there has to be a paradigm shift. And that's why I'm saying if we tackle and attack our value system as a nation, and it requires a campaign because it's been there for many years, most of the problems will be reduced. And then now we can deal with the substantive issues that affect Kenyans about food security, about employment, about human rights, and so on and so on. We shouldn't be discussing things that are of, that you know what is good and what is bad, what is ethical and what is unethical.
The things that just form the main fabric of a human being. Commissioner Sam Kona, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And thank you for speaking to us. We wish you all the best as you continue the work of ensuring there is integration and cohesion in the country. Not an easy task.
No.
Especially if you start from that point of the moral fabric of the society is already torn. Asante sana. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.